right. Hi.
Hi there.
What session are we on today?
We are on session 48. Yes, hard to
Welcome,
believe.
everyone. Yeah, it's hard to believe. 48 sessions. Thanks for sticking with us.
Yes, we do appreciate your attention to all of these and hope that you're getting some good information because we certainly are.
Yeah.
We ended up the session about the famous or infamous HX letter. Mr. Hume wasn't getting what he wanted out of the Mahatmas, and so he decided he was going to take his case to the public in the form of a letter to be published in the Theosophist. And it was so denigrating to the Mahatmas that HPB didn't want to publish it, but she was ordered to, and she does what she's ordered to by the Mahatmas. But we also heard from the Chelas. 12 of the Chelas signed a protest saying that Hume was expecting favors that no one else ever would have received and had actually received a lot of concessions already, help that no one else ever would have received, except for the fact that the Mahatmas are trying very, very hard to find one more person among the Europeans, as they called them, who could do something similar, at least, to that which HPB was doing. So let's pick up from there. He hasn't made any friends among the Theosophists, and definitely not among the Chelas. They certainly don't want to have to work with this guy, and no one can blame them. So we're on letter number 82. We've received a lot of letters right around this time, July, August, and September of 1882. And it's because they're coming up on the 7-year anniversary. And they're trying desperately to have something to show to the Mahachohan that would help him decide in favor of continuing this experiment beyond the first 7-year trial period. So let's pick up there.
Okay, letter number 82, received at Shimla, autumn 1882. And this is from KH.
This is from KH to Sinnett specifically.
I am sorry for all that has happened, but it was to be expected. Mr. Hume has put his foot in a hornet's nest and must not complain. I am determined not to influence you, and therefore will not look your way to find out how the matter stands with you, my friend. And if you are not entirely disgusted with our system and ways, if it is still your desire to carry on a correspondence and learn, something must be done to check the irresponsible benefactor.
And that's Hume, who considered himself to be doing such a favor for the Mahatmas.
I prevented HPB from sending Hume a worse letter than she wrote to you.
HPB was still fuming about this letter, and she was so angry that not only did she write to Sinnett complaining about Hume, but she wrote a letter to Hume, apparently just letting him have it. And KH said, "You're not going to send that letter." So she reluctantly did not send it, but we'll see the rest of it.
I cannot force her to transmit his letters to me, nor mine to him, and since it is no longer possible for me to trust Fern, and DK can't be sacrificed to a man who is utterly unable to appreciate any service rendered except his own, what shall we do about it?
And he can't use DK because DK is on the verge of passing an important initiation. And so he's not going to force him to interact with anyone who has this negative energy like Hume has.
DK is one of the higher Chelas. Jwal Kul is his full name, and he becomes more prominent later.
Oh, yes.
Since we have mixed ourselves with the outside world, we have no right to suppress the personal opinion of its individual members, nor avoid their criticisms, however unfavorable to us. Hence the order to HPB to publish Mr. Hume's article. But since we would have the world see both sides of the question, we have also allowed the joint protest of Deb, Subarao, Damodar, and a few other chelas to follow his criticism of ourselves and our system in the Theosophist. They should have put the protest first, not to follow it.
No, I think it was fine.
Yeah.
Because they put AHPB's letter first, introducing it, but saying, I really dislike this letter. So they kind of sandwiched it in between two protests.
I gave you only hints of what at some other time I will write more at length. Think in the meantime of the difficulties that lie naturally in our way, and let us not, if your friendship for me is sincere, by struggling with our chains, make them tighter and heavier.
And what he means by that is the restrictions that both of them have. Anyone who proposes themselves to be a chela already is starting to take on some responsibilities and agree to follow some of the rules. If you don't follow any of the rules, you have zero chance of succeeding. So he's saying, don't struggle with these restrictions that we have to put on you. All it does, as you see with Mr. Hume, is to make things worse.
For my part, I will willingly run the risk of being thought a self-contradicting ignoramus and criticized in unmeasured terms by Mr. Hume in print, provided you really profit from the lesson and share your knowledge with the world. But to tell you the truth, I am never likely to risk myself again with any other European but yourself.
He is really, really worn down by Hume. It's really sad the way Hume has mistreated him and the relationship that they had. And keep in mind that Hume inserted himself into this whole situation at the very beginning, starting in 1880, when Sinnett found out that he was going to get a reply to his letter that through HPB was transmitted to KH. And as soon as he heard that, Hume said, oh, I want to get in on this too. So he wrote another letter. And he's like, you're not going to get all the attention here. I'm going to be their chief agent here, that they're going to deal with the outer world. Get out of my way because I'm the main person here. So he did insert himself into the whole situation, and it would have been better if he had just stayed out of it.
As you now see, our connection with the outside world can bring nothing but sorrow to those who so faithfully serve us, and bring discredit to our brotherhood. No Asian is ever likely to be affected by Mr. Hume's egotistical thrusts against us, but these thrusts and criticisms that the European readers will accept as a revelation and a confession without ever suspecting from whence they have arisen and by what a deeply egotistical feeling they have been generated. These thrusts are calculated to do a great harm in a direction you have not hitherto dreamt of. Wow. Resolved not to lose so useful a tool, the Chauhan permitted himself to be over-persuaded by us into giving approval of my correspondence with Hume.
Remember, in the very beginning, KH traveled all the way to close to Lahore, which was a long journey for him, on horseback mostly. And he communicated directly with the Chauhan about this letter, the first letter that Hume wrote, and got his okay to correspond with him. And that was the very beginning of this relationship between the Mahatmas and with Mr. Hume.
Surprised KH went in person.
He dedicated himself to this experiment. This he had been working for several years. Remember, he went, when he was still young, to Europe, studied at 3 different universities specifically for this work. So he was setting the stage for several years before this. And there was no other chela who had any kind of education in Europe that he could count on. This was an extreme expenditure of energy on KH's part.
Of course.
And so he was very invested in
It
this.
seems that way. I had pledged my word to him that he had repented, that he was a changed man. He's saying that about Hume.
Well, this wasn't at the very beginning. This was more recently. Because remember, there were times when the Chohan was very pleased with the work that Hume was doing. I kind of took us back to the very beginning, so that threw you off. But he's now referring to closer to the current time here.
Okay. He pledged his word to the Chohan that Hume had repented.
Yes, so KH said, I really believe that he's a changed man.
He's vouching for him, basically.
Yes, he is.
And now how shall I ever face my great master, who is laughed at, made the object of Mr. Hume's wit, called Ramses the Great, and other such indecent remarks? And he used terms in his letters, the brutal grossness of which prevents me from repeating them, which have revolted my soul when I read them, words so filthy as to pollute the very air that touched them, and that I hasten to send you with the letter that contained it, so as not to have those pages in my house, full of young and innocent chelas, that I would prevent from ever hearing such terms.
So what those terms were, we don't know, but apparently they were so gross.
Well, the letter's published in the Theosophist.
No, not that one. He sent some other letters that Hume had written. He said, I don't want that filth in my house where I have young chelas coming in all the time. I don't want them exposed to that. And so he sent them away.
Wow. Then you yourself, my friend, influenced in this by him more than you know or suspect, you yourself deduce only too readily a contradiction from incompleteness. He's still talking about how he's being blamed for contradicting himself.
Right.
The novelty or inexplicable aspect of any asserted fact in our science is not a sufficient reason for setting it immediately down as a contradiction, and proclaim, as Hume does in his article, that he could teach in 1 week that which he succeeded in drawing out of us in 18 months. Mm-hmm. For your knowledge is as yet so limited that it would be difficult for him to say how much we do or do not know. That is the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Yes. But even negative examples are good for us because they teach us what mistakes we should not make. Mm-hmm. So if someone else ruins their life, ruins their opportunities, pay close attention to that. Please do that. Mm-hmm. Because it can save you an inordinate amount of grief and suffering for yourself.
Very true. But I have lingered too long over this irrational, unphilosophical, and illogical attack upon ourselves and system. One day we will show the invalidity of the objections preferred by Mr. Hume. He accuses me of giving false ideas and facts to the world through him, and adds that he would willingly break with us, except for his desire of benefiting the world.
He is very manipulative, and he's convinced that he is the most brilliant person in the world. No one is smarter than me. But we see, first he tries to schmooze and to say nice things about them, and we're going to see more of that later. It's absolutely ridiculous, some of the things he does.
However, if you do not bring him to his senses, there will soon be an end to all, this time irrevocable. I need not assure you of my sincere regard for you and our gratitude for what you have done for the society. Whatever happens, I am at your service. Yours in good faith, K.H.
So fortunately, Sinnett is still in good graces. He is actually making some progress, haltingly and slowly. And K.H. still absolutely is very happy with Sinnett. So he's still on solid ground. Hume is on very shaky ground. All right, letter number 83. Now, this is different. This is from DK, except sometimes they spell his name with a G. So sometimes he calls him GK.
Oh, my goodness.
But keep in mind that any of these languages that don't use the Roman alphabet, you have to transliterate. So their sounds don't sound to the ear exactly the same. In some cases, a sound we would interpret as a D, D, could actually be more of a J.
Yeah.
So just keep in mind that in these early transliterations, they hadn't standardized it as well.
Similar to how we explain the same thing about V's and W's.
Yeah.
Those can be interchangeable sometimes. Letter number 83. This is probably a few days after the previous.
Yeah, but it's all right around the same, not very long. These letters are coming fast and furious.
Is it safe to
point.
assume that Sinnett would have sent one in between? He would have replied to letter
Not
80?
necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. And we need to keep in mind that KH is writing numerous letters to Hume that we never get to see because Hume threw them away or something.
Oh, so he is still reaching out to him.
Oh, yes. He is really, really trying to save him.
Wow.
He's putting everything forward that he can to try to keep him in the fold.
Okay, letter number 83 from Dwal Kul. I am commanded by my beloved master, known in India and the western lands as Kudhumi Lal Singh, or KH, to make in his name the following declaration in answer to a certain statement made by Mr. W. Oxley.
So here he's responding to something that was in the Theosophist. We're not going to go into any details of it, but I kept this letter mostly intact just to get another feeling of how DK writes.
By Mr. W. Oxley and sent by him for publication in the Theosophist. It is claimed by the said gentleman that my master Kudhumi, A, has thrice visited him by the astral form, and B, that he had a conversation with Mr. Oxley when, as alleged, he gave the latter certain explanations in reference to astral bodies in general, and the incompetency of his own Mayavi Rupa to preserve its consciousness simultaneously with the body at both ends of the line.
So here's what's going on. Numerous people, mediums in London, are now claiming that KH is appearing to them in visions or astrally and conveying information to them. And it's getting to be a problem. So therefore, DK is conveying information from KH to be given to these mediums that claim that they have been communicating with KH.
The term that we just heard, Mayavi Rupa, that relates to the astral body.
Right. In other words, when a yogi, or for the spiritualist, a dead spirit, visits someone, they would do that in their Mayavi Rupa, an artificial vehicle that looks normally like them but could look like anything.
Therefore, my master declares that, 1. Whomsoever Mr. Oxley may have seen and conversed with at the time described, it was not with Kudhumi, the writer of the letters published in the Occult World.
So it's very possible that someone did appear to him, but if it actually occurred, it was most likely an elemental posing as KH, and that happens frequently.
2. Notwithstanding that my master knows the gentleman in question, who once honored him with an autograph letter, thereby giving him the means of making his, Mr. Oxley's, acquaintance and of sincerely admiring his intuitional powers and Western learning, yet he has never approached him, whether astrally or otherwise, nor has he ever had any conversation with Mr. Oxley, least of all one of that nature in which both the subject and predicate, the premises and conclusions are all wrong.
An autograph letter is a signed letter. We actually have several letters by HPB where someone decided they wanted her signature, so they just cut off her signature from the letter, and the rest of the letter is intact, but the signature isn't there. But an autograph letter at the time meant a signed letter rather than a copy of someone's letter.
And number 3, in consequence of the said claims, the repetition of which is calculated to lead many of our theosophists into error, my master has determined to issue the following resolution.
So this is kind of like a declaration. Whereas such and this such and such, therefore I now declare
Legalese. Henceforth, any medium or seer who will feel disposed to claim either to have been visited by, or to have held conversation with, or to have seen my master, will have to substantiate the claim by prefixing his or her statement with 3 secret words, which he, my teacher, will divulge to and leave in the safekeeping of Mr. A.O. Hume and Mr. A.P. Sinnett, the respective president and vice president of the Eclectic Theosophical Society of Shimla. As long as they do not find these 3 words correctly repeated by a medium or heading a statement to that effect, whether verbal or printed, emanating from him or her, or on his or her behalf, the claim shall be regarded as a gratuitous assumption, and no notice will be taken of it. To his regret, my master is forced to adopt this step, as unfortunately of late such self-deceptions have become quite frequent and would demand a speedy check. The above declaration and statement to be appended as a footnote to Mr. Oxley's published statement.
So Oxley had sent something to HPB to publish in the Theosophist, and he's saying, I'm ordered to send this to you, and that should follow that statement.
By order, Jwal Cool.
And then there's an M period after that I've never seen associated with his name, and 3 small X's. And they're not in the shape of a triangle, it's just 3 X's. So what that means, I have no idea. But he's telling them that both Hume and Sinnett are going to receive 3 words, and that if any of these mediums who claim that KH is appearing to them can't repeat those 3 words, then it's bogus.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. So we're setting the stage here. Letter number 84. This was in late August.
We have a gap of a few months here, don't we?
Well, actually, I'm not sure, because the other one said autumn. And some of these, I suspect that that's something that Sinnett wrote on the letter, because sometimes he would write received late autumn or something, and he was just guessing. He was quite often wrong when he went after the fact and added notes to these letters.
Okay.
On some of them,
I see.
This actually fits in here based on all of the circumstances, but the date may be off somewhat.
Letter number 84. This is back to KH writing. My dear friend, this will be delivered to your house by Darbagiri Nath, a young Chela of mine, and his brother Chela, Chandra Kusho.
Now, we've heard the name Darbagiri Nath before, and very recently he was one of the signers of the protest. And his brother Chela, Chandra Kusho, his real name was, I believe, Keshav Pillai, Pillai. And he was a government worker, but he was a Chela on probation. But a lot of these Chelas use alternate names, and it sometimes gets very confusing.
They are forbidden to enter anyone's house without being invited to do so. Therefore, I pray you to pardon our savage customs and, at the same time, to humor them by sending them an invitation in your name, either now, if you can receive them privately and without risking their meeting at your place with any stranger, or at any other time during the evening or late at night. Interesting.
Now, remember, not that long ago, KH told Sinnett that he was going to be sending a Chela to him, and he says, please don't frighten the boy. And this is who he's referring to.
I have not the slightest objection to your lady, Mrs. S., seeing either of them, but I pray her not to address them, since they are forbidden by our religious laws to speak with any lady, their mothers and sisters excepted, and she would otherwise greatly embarrass them. Oh my goodness.
Because they wouldn't be able to even acknowledge that she was talking to them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They have to follow very strict orders.
They're upholding these kind of strange religious rules. Huh.
And
Interesting.
there are reasons for it, and it's not our business to know exactly what those reasons are.
That's interesting. I pray her to do so in my name and for my sake. I trust also to your friendship that none but you will speak with them. They have their mission, and beyond that, they must not go.
And this is their mission.
1, to deliver into your hands my answers to the famous contradictions, and 2, to interview Mr. Fern.
Now, this is interesting. So Fern doesn't live with Sinnott. So apparently they're going to visit Sinnott at his house and then somehow go visit Fern. Now, Fern is living with Hume. Whether or not they're going to visit him astrally, which is very possible because Fern is clairvoyant and they could easily do that. So that's what I'm assuming when he says they're going to interview Mr. Fern.
If you have an answer for me, Darbagiri Nath will come for it whenever you are ready. I also entreat you most earnestly not to inflict Mr. Hume upon them.
Yeah.
Do not think of what has happened until everything is explained. Ever yours, K.H. Wow. P.S. They are also forbidden to shake hands with any man or woman. Therefore, to touch anyone but you can invite my little man to come and talk with you as much as you like, provided you are discreet.
Very mysterious, this whole business. But specifically, they're to protect their own auras from these outside influences. And Europeans have very different emanations from what the Asian culture has. They're much more spiritual in general than Europeans are. So they have to protect themselves, and especially if they are working for a near initiation. And as we've said, there are major initiations and minor initiations.
These are actually really interesting clues. We talk endlessly about purifying ourselves at all levels, foods we eat, but more importantly than the physical things, it's our energy, it's the thoughts we think and the emotions that we have. And these are actual clues of people who are pure, more pure than most of us. So pure, in fact, they won't even touch someone. Can you imagine, like, most of us can relate to that. If you hug someone who's got nasty energy or who's angry or who's an energy vampire,
You just absorb that energy.
God forbid having an intimate encounter with someone who's an energy vampire like that. This is an example of what we're talking about. When you are pure, you're not going to want to do certain things anymore. Take these as like, okay, we can follow these guys. We don't need to be, as strict all the time, but I think that's fascinating.
And there's a reason why they do this, namaste, the namaskar, instead of, oh, hi, how are you? And merging your energies. It's, that's exactly what Paul was explaining.
Not to mention germs.
Yeah, that too.
They could be germaphobes.
Yes, but we're in winter time still here, and
yeah, that's
it's
true.
the flu and cold season. Now, we're going to kind of go out of order here because these two chelas are going to be delivering the next letter, which is 85A. And what it is a list of the contradictions, supposedly, that Sinnott has written up, and most likely with the help of Hume. But on the same page, or immediately after that, K.H. delivered his responses to those contradictions, supposed contradictions.
Now, these would be just Sinnott asking for clarification, not blaming them for always contradicting themselves.
Right.
He's not taking a stance like Hume is.
No, he doesn't have the same stance, but he's kind of caught between the two of them because he kind of feels the same way Hume does to an extent, not nearly as much as Mr. Hume, but he's not entirely on the side of the Mahatmas like the Asian chelas are. So he's a little bit wishy-washy about that. All right, so we're going to jump forward and read the first part of K.H.'s letter where he addresses these so-called contradictions, but he gives a fairly long introduction first. So let's read that part of his letter, and then we will go back to Sinnott's letter listing the contradictions, and we will intersperse at each step what the answer is so that we don't lose track of the sequence of question and answer.
Did you cut and paste to make it intelligible?
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
Very cool. Thank you
Oh,
for
yes.
doing that. Do we think that Hume took a part in proposing these contradictions?
Very likely, we don't know for certain. It may have been entirely Sinnett's thought process in writing just because they had been communicating about them for so long. He may have left Hume out of the final question. We don't know for sure.
This is obviously after the nasty letter was published.
Yes, but not very long after that. So this was letter number 85B. Sinnett's questions are 85A. KH's response is 85B. And they're both written in September 1882. So this is the beginning of KH's letter.
Letter 85B. At this stage of our correspondence, misunderstood as we generally seem to be, even by you, my faithful friend, it may be useful for both of us that you should be made aware of some very important facts connected with adeptship. Oh, so this is going to be some teachings now.
Yes.
It's interesting. He's going to now offer this in the midst of all this drama that's going on. He's going to say, okay, let's continue our lessons.
But it has a lot to do with this situation.
Sure. Understood. Number one, an adept of any rank is one only during the exercise of his occult powers.
And now he's going to explain what that means.
Interesting. 2, whenever these powers are needed, the sovereign will unlocks the door to the inner man. The adept who can emerge and act freely only on condition that his jailer, the outer man, be either completely or partially paralyzed, as the case may require, that is, either A, mentally and physically, B, mentally only, C, physically only, or D, neither mentally nor physically, but with an Akashic film interposed between the outer and the inner man.
All right, so he's told us before, an adept isn't always an adept. Sometimes they're just a human being in a human body. So he says, if they're going to operate as an adept, they have to let the adept, which is basically their higher self, take over. And in order to do that, the physical being, the personality, has to be either partially or completely paralyzed. So that can take any of 4 forms. It can be either mentally and physically. It can be mentally only. It can be physically only. Or it can be neither mentally nor physically, but with an Akashic veil, an Akashic film interposed between the adept and the personality.
None of those states would even be noticeable by somebody walking by, though.
No.
You would still see a person.
Right.
You wouldn't know what's going on there.
Only if you're very perceptive. Mm-hmm. And then you would notice a distinct change in that person.
And in energy, right, and everything, really. This is very interesting because when everything that I've understood about the expansion of consciousness, which is walking the path towards adeptship, expanding our knowledge, growing in awareness and wisdom lifetime after lifetime, until we take initiation after initiation towards becoming an adept, the consciousness that we're achieving is our consciousness. We don't choose to operate with that consciousness versus like a lower consciousness. We don't have that option. But then apparently we do have an option to utilize a dual consciousness. That's very odd, very different.
The closest we can get is after several lifetimes practicing Raja Yoga, you may have from time to time an experience of entering into samadhi, the very lowest level of samadhi. And even then, you're going to, while you are in that state of samadhi, lose all consciousness of the outer physical body.
Is that what it's referring to, though?
Well, I'm making an analogy here.
Okay, similar. Okay.
That's how we can at least get a partial understanding of this. And we have to use our imagination because very, very few of you most likely will have experienced true samadhi during meditation. That comes after a few lifetimes of work in this.
This is just very interesting. Let's consider that the adept is still a human, even though they're superhuman. Why wouldn't they have access to their full wisdom always, their full capacities always? That's weird. I mean, I hear what it's saying. That's interesting.
And it isn't up to us to determine what the laws of nature require.
No.
It is what it is. And they know how to work with it. That's the whole point of being a Mahatma, is to have a good understanding of how nature works up to a certain point. Obviously, there's still more that the Dhyan Chohans learn.
Tell me if this might be another analogy. I'm trying to relate this to something. I enjoy cars and fast cars, and a lot of cars have different drive modes. Mm-hmm. They have like an eco mode where it's gas savings and it's slower and more economical. Then there's like a regular drive mode. Then there's like a high performance drive mode. And if you're a fast car lover and you want to go fast in the car, that you spend a bunch of money and get a fast car, you have to actually put it in that mode to utilize the speed. But if you don't put it in that mode, you're just driving with reduced capacities. And I never actually liked that. I'm like, I wish you just push the gas pedal and it goes. But the former would relate to this. They have a normal mode of operation, which is kind of a lower thing, drive mode, eco mode maybe. But then to put it in high performance mode, they have to choose that, which is their adept mode.
Here's another one that goes along with that might be also somewhat understandable. And that is, if you have a high performance vehicle or you rent one, you can go to racetracks.
Right.
Even here in Las Vegas.
Right.
And you can drive a high performance vehicle on a racetrack. But if you drive that vehicle like you're driving in regular traffic, you're probably going to have an accident.
I see where you're going with this.
You
this makes
have
sense.
to be totally focused to
makes
the point
sense.
that if you take your focus off for even an instant, everything can go wrong. The amount of energy that takes is tremendously more. Mm-hmm. The difference here is that the energy that the adept mode takes is actually less.
I love it.
Is actually less than if they tried to accomplish it in the physical body.
Well, physically, energetically, it's less, but they're using tremendous mental power.
They are using tremendous power, but the potential result is so enormously higher. When they have to step themselves down to communicate physically with
like moving
these
through
two
mud.
men, it is taking them an enormous amount of energy to accomplish that. And it takes a long, long period of time.
That makes sense.
If those two men were elevated in their consciousness, that information could be transmitted instantaneously to them. The way they transmit information to their higher chelas, like DK, they don't have to go through this long, laborious process.
That makes perfect sense. Your analogy is really, really good about the race car. And then the stepping down of the energy, like a train rolling on tracks is heavy. But what if it was a maglev train where it was levitating on a magnet? There's no friction.
Right.
Vroom.
Exactly.
That's the same concept. That makes perfect sense. Oh,
And
I can't wait to contemplate this later.
That's what Hume cannot figure out. He can't grasp the reality that what they're doing is so drastically different from what scientists explain. He says they're just imagining stuff.
This is a lesson in being willing to let go. This is my own self-talk too. You know that. This is a lesson in letting go of what I think it's supposed to be like and being open to something new.
Until you begin to experience some of these things, you are just imagining, and it's going to be completely wrong. So don't get fixated on how you think it is or how you think it should be, because that's what Hume does, and he is getting absolutely nowhere.
Mm-hmm. This is amazing stuff. Okay, we read 1 and 2. Let's see.
Yes.
And we're on number 3. So he's giving important facts connected with adeptship. Okay, 1, 2, and now this is number 3. The smallest exercise of occult powers then, as you will now see, requires an effort. We may compare it to the inner muscular effort of an athlete preparing to use his physical strength, as no athlete is likely to be always amusing himself at swelling his veins in anticipation of having to lift a weight. No adept can be expected to keep his will in constant tension and the inner man in full function when there's no immediate necessity for it. There you go.
Exactly.
Wow.
They're masters at energy conservation.
Yeah. We need to contemplate, meditate on, to understand this, meditate on the koshas and how the physical brain works, how the etheric body works, how the astral body works, how the lower mental, higher mental, and then, of course, the higher self, which is the soul or the true self, which is what they're conserving for when it's necessary. But you have to meditate on this and enter samadhi once in a while.
This is why it takes several lifetimes. It really does. So if you're impatient, you're going to have nothing but problems.
The brain is only like the physical interface to the physical world. The consciousness that's going on is so much more than just the brain. When the inner man rests, the adept becomes an ordinary man, limited to his physical senses and the functions of his physical brain. This is juicy. This is really good. Habit sharpens the intuitions of the latter,
The physical brain.
but is unable to make them supersensuous.
Meaning you can't go beyond the senses. The brain works with the senses. That is your interface. There is something beyond that. And if you have experienced that, then the brain can at least get some comprehension of it, but it can't receive it directly. It's only somewhat vaguely aware of it. You have to paralyze the brain in order for that higher function to operate. And then the problem is trying to get some perception of that into the physical brain.
Either paralyze it or do what Eckhart Tolle teaches and calm the monkey mind, which we just said is like paralyzing it. Can you imagine if all the monkeying around calmed down? Then you're open to more. And then being able to receive insights. Some people are more naturally attuned to it than others, but we can all practice it and work on it. Similar to how sometimes when you dream at night, you wake up and it's hard to really remember all the details, even though it was so vivid and specific just a moment ago when you were dreaming it. Similar. How do you bring the insights from samadhi, from the inner man, the inner planes, out into the world physically and do something with it? That's one of the biggest goals here.
If you actually get some insights through your higher self during meditation or just quiet moments, and then later you try to recall those, it's like, wait a minute, it made so much sense when I was in meditation. Why can't I put it in words now?
Therein lies one of the main differences between the lower mind and higher mind. The lower mind operates with data, like facts and figures, things that we can communicate easily with words and images.
And things that can be
concrete.
shared with other people.
Higher mental activity, which is where the soul is and the inner man, the intuitions, the insights are more vague, but they're powerful and very meaningful, harder to put into language. Even KH says he's being jailed in a sense. So how do you take these grand intuitions and like put them in a jail cell, which is words and physical things? And that's our goal, though, or one of them.
So keep this in mind. When the Mahatmas are operating as a Mahatma, they are at the level of the higher self. If their Chela can raise his consciousness to the same level, boom, you've got a direct connection there. But if you've got a lay Chela who is still operating in the physical brain, they're at a severe disadvantage trying to communicate with that individual. And they can only hope that that individual will be inspired to raise his or her consciousness little by little to be able to make that connection. It's like high voltage electricity. You can transmit it easily across a large distance. But in order for it to be utilized by people in the normal world, it has to be transformed down, stepped down. But you also lose a lot of that ability. So if everyone had high voltage connections, then it could be transmitted around the entire world.
That's why airplanes fly at 36,000 feet. It's more efficient up there. The air is thinner. If they tried to fly at 100 feet, they're pushing through thicker air, and it's less efficient.
And your flight would cost you $40,000.
Because the gas, they'd be burning more fuel. Continuing along here, this is really good stuff. I love when he gives teachings like this.
Yes.
The inner adept is always ready. I mean, just like our higher selves are always ready. Always on the alert, and that suffices for our purposes. At moments of rest, then, his faculties are at rest also. When I sit at my meals, or when I am dressing, reading, or otherwise occupied, I'm not even thinking of those near me.
Now, this is interesting. He's going to give an example.
Djwal Khul could easily break his nose, causing it to bleed, as he did the other night by running into a beam in the dark because instead of throwing a film, he had foolishly paralyzed all his outer senses while talking with a distant friend, and I remained placidly ignorant of the fact. I was not thinking of him, hence my ignorance.
So KH was not operating in his adept mode.
I love that.
And DK wasn't physically present in the same house, but DK was communicating with a friend astrally, or at a higher level, rather. And because he didn't use the right type of filter to paralyze partially the physical body, he was walking around and bam, smacked into a low beam. And in Tibet, they have lots of buildings that have low beams that you could easily smack into if you're not careful.
This is another insight here. Now, when we go into a higher consciousness during meditation and approach the lower levels of samadhi, which is accessible, it's nothing too crazy, we need to be either seated in a still seat, meditative seat, or lying down on our back or something. We're not out doing tasks with our physical body while we're in samadhi, but these guys can't.
They have learned how to do that.
It's literally a dual consciousness somehow.
Yes.
It's probably safe to assume that when they're doing a lot of their work, they probably are in a meditative seat, but not always.
A lot of times it's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would absolutely be easier if they're in meditation, then they can operate freely on the higher level Buddhic consciousness.
Fascinating. From the aforesaid, you may well infer that an adept is an ordinary mortal at all moments of his daily life, except those when the inner man is acting. Couple this with the unpleasant fact that we are forbidden to use one particle of our powers in connection with the eclectics, for which you have to thank your president and him alone, so that the little that is done is, so to speak, smuggled in, and then conclude from that the following.
Now, before we continue, let's look at that. Remember, at the very beginning, KH was able to precipitate letters from a distance, hundreds or thousands of miles away. Think of the words, and the letter would be precipitated sometimes right before their eyes. This only lasted for a certain period of time, and then they had to start using a different method, which was that he could project it to one of the chelas, and then that chela would write it in his handwriting, and then that letter would be transmitted somehow to the recipient. Now he's saying it has gotten even worse, and it's 100% because of Mr. Hume.
Wow.
They are forbidden to use any of their adept powers in making this communication. So he can only write when he is not using his powers.
But doesn't that take more energy?
It takes an enormous...
So why would they be punished like that?
don't know. I don't know their reasons. But Mr. Hume, because of his nastiness, has put all kinds of restrictions on them.
Wow, that's interesting to contemplate too, to see why that might be the case. He's it's almost like he's being punished. Yeah.
And that could very well be, yes.
Hmm.
But they're also being punished because of their interactions with the outer world.
That was a willing sacrifice.
It is. And KH is sacrificing an enormous amount to try to make this happen.
This is still the introduction to
Yes,
the
it
letter.
is.
So we're still not through that part yet.
Right.
Um,
So
He's-
he's saying here, based on the information I've given you, now these are the conclusions that you can make from that.
KH, when writing to us, is not an adept. Why is he talking about himself in third person there?
Because he's saying you can conclude this.
Okay. KH, when writing to us, is not an adept. That's still weird, though. He's got the consciousness, the expanded something is operating through his brain.
He knows, even in his physical brain, he knows the facts. He's only able to
Okay.
transmit information, facts that these two guys
Okay.
can comprehend.
Okay. KH, when writing to us, is not an adept. A non-adept is fallible.
Yes.
This is so good. These guys are amazing. And they're in a human body, so of course.
Exactly. And he's having to work
Oh my
as a human,
gosh.
not as an adept.
This is incredible. Okay. A non-adept is fallible. Therefore, KH may very easily commit mistakes of punctuation that will often change entirely the whole sense of a sentence. Idiomatic mistakes are also very likely to occur, especially when writing as hurriedly as I do. And mistakes arising from occasional confusion of terms that I had to learn from you, since it is you who are the author of rounds, rings, earthly rings, etc.
Yeah, these terms came from Sinnett and partially from Hume, but most of them from Sinnett. Because KH would try to explain things and he would say our Tibetan terms are going to be completely incomprehensible. So let me explain it and then you come up with the term and we'll use that term.
Now, with all this, let me say that after having carefully read over our famous contradictions, after giving them to Moria to be read, and then to a high adept whose powers are not in the Chohan's chancery, and sequestered by him to prevent him from squandering them on the unworthy objects of his personal predilections, after doing all this, I was told by the latter the following. The latter would be the Chohan, though, right? The high adept
Actually,
would be
you are right.
the former.
The
He's
Chohan.
calling the high adept someone higher than the Chohan, isn't he?
I believe so.
Whose powers are not in the Chohan's chancery.
Chancery is a justice court or judge, someone who decides right or wrong based on our normal perception rather than on legal terms.
What that sounds like to me is that this high adept isn't higher than the Chohan. It's just a brother from a different lodge.
It could be.
Maybe someone equivalent to Moria, but just not in their group, like the
Right,
other,
and-
a different brotherhood.
There is someone who is very highly evolved who was consulted about this to give his opinion of it.
And then his Chohan, his master, said the following. It is all perfectly correct. Knowing what you mean, I cannot find in these fragments anything that would really conflict with any of the others. But since many sentences are incomplete and the subjects are scattered about without any order, I do not wonder that your lay chelas should find fault with them. Yes, they do require a more explicit and clear exposition. These guys are amazing. They're all working together.
Yes,
How cool
they
is
do.
this dialogue that they have? Wow.
Yeah, this is why it is so interesting to see how they operate, because these are all people who operate out of kindness,
There's no ego.
compassion, love. There is zero ego or very, very little.
This Chohan is someone extremely evolved, and he's saying, yeah, they require a little more exposition. And KH is probably like, okay, cool, I'll go do that. This is amazing. Such is the decree of an adept, and I abide by it. I will try to complete the information for your sake. In only one case is the plaintiff entitled to a hearing. Now, the plaintiff is Sinnett in this case. Hume.
Yes.
Okay. It is marked on your pages as 12a and 12b. In occult sciences, the lay chelas, instead of accusing their gurus of contradiction, ought to give them the benefit of the doubt in cases where, owing to their great ignorance of that science, they are likely to misinterpret the meaning.
Now, most of you probably know that in the mystery schools, the Greek and probably also in the Egyptian mystery schools, the neophytes were not expected to ever ask questions or even interject anything. They were supposed to listen. They were supposed to sit there, listen to the teachings, listen to the lectures, and in private they could ask questions, but they weren't to interrupt the process.
Well, that's a Hume.
Yeah, Hume, he's the Lord and Master of the world in his mind.
Now, please let me state that, with regard to the two sentences marked 12a and 12b, there is a plain contradiction only for those who are not acquainted with that tenet. You were not, and therefore I plead guilty of an omission, but plead not guilty of a contradiction. So he omitted, just like his Chohan said,
Right.
They're incomplete. It's not that they're contradicting. And even as regards the former, that omission is very small. This is still the intro, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. There are many subjects in ISIS that even HPB was not allowed to become thoroughly acquainted with, yet they are not contradictory, even if they are misleading.
And he's going to explain that it's because they were severely restricted in the amount of the teachings that they were able to give out in 1875 and 6. It was published in 1877, but very little was allowed to be explained at that time.
The point in C.C. Massey's complaining criticism was not that the whole truth had not been given, but that the truth and facts of 1877 were represented as errors and contradicted in 1882, that had to be shown under its true colors, namely that of an entire misconception, due to the fact that the septenary doctrine had not yet been divulged to the world at the time when Isis was written.
All right, so that's one of the things they weren't allowed to teach was the seven koshas.
Wow.
The septenary doctrine. Instead, they talked only about three because they were trying to compare things to the concepts that most Christians had. Body, soul, and spirit. That was the biggest breakdown that they could imagine, so they kept it to that.
Now, the septenary doctrine applies to much more than just the koshas, though.
It applies in numerous different instances.
I wonder how we would reconcile that, though. The teaching of the koshas is ancient, not from them, perhaps, but it's in some ancient texts, though.
Yes, but this information in ISIS Unveiled was specifically for Europeans.
Okay.
They were not students of ancient Asian culture, and they didn't even recognize that there was any value to it.
Interesting. The ancient texts and the teachers of those texts didn't try to get it to the Westerners until Vivekananda and Yogananda and our masters tried to get it to the Western world. This is so interesting.
Even Max Mueller and other Oriental scholars only looked at it as primitive beliefs and certainly not as anything that had any validity whatsoever.
My goodness, this is so insightful, this one. I am sorry you do not find her answer written under my direct inspiration very satisfactory.
Meaning HPBs.
For it proves to me only that you still have not grasped very firmly the difference between the sixth and seventh principles and the fifth, or the immortal monad or ego, and the astral or personal monad or ego. Note.
So even Sinnott, after all this, still doesn't understand it. How is he going to be able to explain that in 1877 to people who hadn't heard anything at all?
It makes sense. Yeah, exactly. No doubt, the real ego abides in the higher principles, which are reincarnated periodically every 1, 2, or 3,000 years or longer. That's the normal period of Bardo. It takes that long.
Right. For a highly developed person, for a person who is very kind, very conscientious.
But the immortal ego, The individual monad is not the personal monad, which is the fifth. And the passage in Isis did not answer Eastern reincarnationists who maintain in that same Isis that the individuality or the immortal ego has to reappear in every cycle. But the Western spiritualists, especially the French spiritists, who teach that it is the personal or astral monad, or the intellectual mind, the fifth principle in short, that is reincarnated each time.
Now, this is another problem that they encountered with Isis Unveiled, and that is that the spiritualists were teaching Christian concepts. They didn't teach reincarnation at all. The only ones that taught reincarnation were a group of French spiritualists under Allan Kardec, who believed in reincarnation, but they didn't teach anything about a higher self. They taught only that the personality came back time after time after time.
And we know that absolutely is wrong.
So specifically for that reason, they did not use the word reincarnation in Isis Unveiled, because immediately they would have thought, oh yeah, that means the personality keeps coming back.
No.
And they didn't want to confuse that. So they used a different term. They used the term metempsychosis instead of reincarnation to emphasize that there was a return, but not in the same way that the French spiritualists believed.
The astral monad is the personal ego, and therefore it never reincarnates, as the French spiritists claim, except under exceptional circumstances, in which case it does not become a shell, but if successful in its second reincarnation, will become one at the end of that life, and then gradually lose its personality after being emptied of its best and highest spiritual attributes by the immortal monad or the spiritual ego during the last and supreme struggle.
So he's explaining there are unusual circumstances when the same personality does reincarnate.
And we've talked about those in accidents or violent deaths or young children.
Right. Usually when it's a younger person and they may have still the same astral body and the same lower mental body. And those would not go through the after-death experience, but almost immediately, those lower principles would incarnate in another physical body and continue on.
And they would have similar traits, similar
Yes.
personality traits, maybe even very similar, and many times memories.
Sometimes they actually remember some of the things that happened to them in that aborted life, so to speak.
But those are the exceptions.
Very rare. So he's saying, yes, those would be considered a personality reincarnating, but then at the end of that next life, they would go through the regular process that everyone else goes through. Giving you the introduction took up a little more time than we expected, but we got some really good information out of it. In our session number 49, we will go back to Sinnett's letter, 85A, the actual contradictions, and we will intersperse KH's explanations of why those were not contradictions. The only one thing that he admitted to was that he omitted, and as we will find out, it was one word that was omitted. So, yeah, we'll see the rest of this story, but it's all very good information for us. We're learning so much about how this chela-ship process works and what it entails to transform your way of thinking, your way of acting to something that more resembles those of the Mahatmas. Come out of your world into ours. Well, I can see no reason to stay in the outer world, especially today. So I'm all on board for this moving to their way of looking at things and their way of operating in life. I think they've got the right ideas.
I think so too.
All right. So we'll see you at our next session, number 49. Stay tuned. We keep learning more and more stuff every single time. Thanks for following along.